Hello. It's been a while since the last video, because motivation for the series dipped and I had other priorities. I do intend to finish this series, so here's a short video to get me started. Since the last one, Foundry 0.8 came out and made some significant changes to the API that are going to leave this system in a broken state. There's a migration guide on the Foundry Wiki, which I'll link in the description, so I won't go into details. I'll just point out the changes I needed to make to my system in order to make it work again, starting with the simple stuff. I'm assuming you've already updated Foundry to 0.8.7 or higher, and that you've updated the system.json to reflect that. So I'm going to jump right into the changes. First of all, we used to access object IDs by using the _ID property, like when setting the author of a chat message, for instance. The property we're supposed to use now is ID. Same thing without the underscore. Similarly, in some places we used actor.owner to restrict some sheet and chat message actions to the owner of the actor. Now we need to be using actor.isOwner. Next, in many places, we use the getOwnedItem method from the actors class to retrieve, owned items. Actors now have an items property on which we can call the method get with the item ID in order to retrieve it. After that, we need to make some slight changes on how we call the roll.roll function. It's apparently becoming asynchronous soon, so to get ahead of the curve, we can pass to the roll function an options object containing a property named async set to true. And since this will make the function return a promise, we probably want to await its completion. Note that all the functions where I'm using this are already asynchronous, so I don't have to modify them further. Now we're getting onto the big change. Entities are now called documents, so in the init hook, where we have been specifying entity classes, we now have to use the document class property. That name change doesn't come alone though, as it also changes how owned items are being created and deleted. Owned items are now embedded documents, so to create one, instead of using actor.createOwnedItems, we now use actor.createEmbeddedDocuments and specify the type of document we want to create. In this case, an item. You may have noticed that the function is called createEmbeddedDocuments with an S, because we can create multiple documents at once, which means that the data for the item we're creating needs to live in an array. Likewise, owned item deletion is done through the deleteEmbeddedDocuments method. All the changes up to this point are technically optional for 0.8, but the support for the old ways will be removed in 0.9, so might as well do this now. Next, we're on to the things we actually need to fix. This starts with the broken actor and item sheets. This is happening because the way sheets access data has changed. Let's take the item sheet class for instance. In the getData function, super.getData used to return a copy of the actor data. Now it returns a copy of the document itself. According to the migration guide, the recommended way of dealing with this is now by creating your own data object from scratch. But to minimize the disruption to the sheet templates, we can make it so that this new object has the same structure as the old one. We'll call this object sheet data, and for this sheet, we'll need at least the following: whether the current user owns the sheet, whether the sheet is editable, a reference to the item so we can grab its name and icon, and the data we want to display, which now lives one level deeper. After that, it's business as usual, except that we're reading the base data to construct the sheet data. With this done, the character and item sheets should be working again. Finally, the biggest change in 0.8, as far as this system is concerned, is to the combat tracker, in particular the combatant. I'll assume that my video on customizing the combat tracker is still fresh in your memory. If not, go watch it. Prior to 0.8, combatant was an anonymous structure. In 0.8, combatant is now a full-fledged class, a type of embedded document to be precise. This means that a number of things the combat class had to handle can now be dealt by the combatant class itself. As a reminder, the reason we needed to customize the combatant was because we needed to keep track of and edit the action points each character involved in the combat was spending. And we did that through the combatant's flags. We're still doing this, and to begin with, we'll want to make sure this is set to a sensible value when the combatant is created. We can use the onCreate callback to do this. But this time, since combatant is a document, we have to use the setFlag method, just like we did in the combat class for the turn history. This effectively replaced the prepare combatant method, which doesn't exist anymore. Similarly, the getInitiative formula has moved from the combat class to the combatant class. We can pretty much cut and paste it, though we'll have to make a small change to get the initiative penalty flag the proper way. Next, we'll write a few convenience functions. In the combat class, whenever we push or pop the history, we read or write a bunch of combatant info. I'm doing the same thing multiple times in several places in the file, so it might be a good idea to make a few methods for this in the combatant class, which I'll call setState and getState. Note that getState doesn't need to be asynchronous because getFlag isn't. I can now call these functions in the combat class. Next, we had a spendShots function that would take a combatant and a number of shots, push the combatant state to the turn history, and update the combatant by changing its initiative. Since the combatant knows how much he's going to spend, there is no need to have this as a parameter of this method, and most of its content can now be handled by the combatant itself. We still need to push the history though, so we'll do that before calling the combatant's own spendShots, which, like the old one, will calculate the new initiative, reset the shot spending field, and update the combatant. Finally, we'll need to update the next round function so that it sets the initiative penalty flag properly on the combatant. And before I forget, we also need to tell Foundry to use our custom combatant class by setting the config.combatant.document class in the init hook. Almost home. All we've got left to do is fix the combat tracker itself. Despite the fact that you can now set the sheet class for editing combatants, that value isn't actually used anywhere yet, so we'll still need to override the onConfigureCombatant method in the combat tracker class to instantiate the correct Combatant Config class. Note in the first line of this function that some things have changed names again. The reference to the encounter that's been worked on has changed from this.combat to this.viewed, as in the combat that's currently viewed in the combat tracker. And like we've done with other places earlier, we're now using get on the list of combatant to retrieve a specific combatant. The other big change is that, like actor sheets, the combat tracker builds from scratch the data it sends to the handlebars template. If we need to display other information in the combat tracker, we need to inject it in the data, as I'm doing here for the shot cost information. I hear some of you ask, how do you know where to inject the data? Well, I simply look at the parent function in Foundry's code, along with the handlebars templates to get an understanding of the data structure. Speaking of templates, we also need to take a look at the combat tracker template. Since my modification to it was fairly simple, I ended up pasting the stock tracker template over my custom one and redoing my changes, adding the shot cost field and interrupt button. Finally, we have to take a look at the Combatant Config dialog box. Just like the combat tracker, I copied over the stock template and re-added my extra field, because that was simpler than figuring out what had changed. And that is it for the migration to Foundry 0.8, at least as far as this system is concerned. If you're encountering migration-related issues that haven't been covered in this video, don't ask me about it. I only know what I've just told you. The best way to get help is by going on the system development channel on Foundry's Discord, or by joining the League of Foundry Devs Discord, both of which I link to in the description. Bye!